Welcome to the Her Empowered Divorce Podcast. I'm your host, Beverly Price, and I am the empowering divorce coach who guides you on your journey before, during, and after divorce, so you can eliminate pain, overwhelm, sadness, and anger, and create more knowledge, skill, and peace than I experienced myself. With my 30 years of divorce and empowerment coaching experience, I understand exactly what you're going through. Divorce is a difficult and emotional journey, but it can also be a time of growth and transformation. Through this podcast, you'll gain valuable insights on all aspects of divorce, from the logistical and financial to the emotional and legal. My goal is to empower you to confidently move forward in your divorce, manage your emotions, think clearly, avoid common mistakes, and ultimately create a happy and fulfilling life. With expert guests, practical advice, actionable tips, and inspiring conversations, we'll explore how to master your divorce and emerge stronger on the other side. You don't have to face this journey alone. Let's start together and create a better future for you. So without further ado, let's get started. Hi, beautiful. I'm so glad you're here today. I am so excited about our episode. I've always been curious about what a prosecutor's thinking when they're going after domestic violence abusers. Well, my guest today is Angela Sarabia. She is an attorney who has spent most of her career prosecuting crimes, especially violent crimes against women. And that is what we are so interested in today. While she was a prosecutor, she won 2 awards from local domestic violence organizations. In her spare time, she's also an actress, and I'll let her tell us how that is connected to her domestic violence work. During the pandemic, she was inspired to write her first play, which focused on ways which violence is used as a tool of manipulation against women. And it addresses unique issues women face as they become victims of a violent crime. Welcome, Angela. I am so glad you're here with us today, and thank you for being here.
Hey, Beverly, it's great to be here.
This is Domestic Violence Month. And so it wouldn't be complete without thinking about where the prosecutor is coming from. So when we think about it, we think about going to court, we think about the fear in the victim. But please let us know what a person can expect once law enforcement has been called. So it would be the step before court.
Absolutely. So once law enforcement is called, and this is true in almost every jurisdiction in the nation, once they're called and it's determined to be an actual domestic violence situation, and each state defines that differently, but generally people who live together as a family or share a child in common, if there's violence between those 2 individuals, that's considered domestic. Once they determine that, law enforcement officials are almost all required to follow a policy of mandatory arrest. The reason for that is because back before the 1970s, law enforcement would advise and separate. So they would put the man in the kitchen, talk to him, put the female in the garage, talk to her. That idea being that, hey, guys don't know where the tools are in the kitchen. No one's going to be able to grab a weapon. It's kind of these outdated notions of men and women's roles, but they would do that. Then they would tell the offender, usually the guy, to just go stay somewhere else tonight. Go take a walk. And then that would be it. They wouldn't make an arrest. Violence was seen as a family matter. And women were dying. They were being killed at great rates. So a study was done, I want to say it was in Detroit in the 1970s, and they did, they would just randomly assign, some officers would be assigned a blue paper and they were to arrest, and some officers would be assigned like a red paper and they were to advise and separate. And they found when you have mandatory arrests, fatalities went down. So it just became the policy in almost every police department in the nation now to arrest one of the parties. A lot of times that affords the victim some time to gather her belongings, to reach a place of safety. to call on family and friends to get her out of that situation. It's important to know that mandatory arrest is the law of the land, because oftentimes a victim will say to law enforcement, well, I wanted you guys to come and stop the violence, but I don't want anyone arrested. And law enforcement officers aren't trying to be rude, but they must arrest in a situation, besides the fact of which it's a crime. Even if a husband so much as shoves a wife and she, or I say husband and wife, but a female partner is hurt in any way, that's a crime. And so law enforcement officials are honor bound to do their duty and arrest in that circumstance. So mandatory arrest will happen in most cases.
I've heard statistics, and I want you to see if this makes sense to you, but that 70% of women that are leaving their abuser are murdered. What 70%? Do you think about that statistic? Yeah, that's what I've heard. Do you think that's high?
It might be a bit high, but it just depends on how you define abuser. If you have an actual situation where there's ongoing violence, and violence is happening in that cycle of violence, so it's happening on a regular basis, and it's escalating over time, which is what we tend to see. So if it starts with pushing, punching, slapping, slowly over time it escalates to choking, hitting, threatening with weapons. That statistic for that type of actual bona fide, it's the cycle of violence is at play thing, fatality rate can be very high. Nobody really can predict anything with an absolute certainty, but studies have shown certain types of things happening in the arguments will make it a little bit more likely that we will have a fatality. One of those is threats to kill coming up a lot during the argument, where he's actually saying, I'm going to kill you. That's more likely that there will be a fatality. Anytime he pulls, I keep saying he, because oftentimes, the violent perpetrators tend to be men, even though this isn't always the case. But if the batterer pulls out a weapon during the course of an argument, whether that's he's cleaning it, he's displaying it, anything of that nature, a weapon comes out and tends to be involved, it's more likely that a fatality is the case. Anytime one party is choking and cutting off the airflow of another party, it's much more likely that we may have a fatality in that circumstance. So things like that tend to make it more likely. So oftentimes, if I was speaking to a victim and I saw that those things were going on in the case at hand, I would say, it's far more likely that you're going to die at the hands of your abuser here if you do not exit this situation, because I'm just telling you what the statistics are, that fatalities are more likely in these cases such as you have. And every prosecutor's office in the nation has this circumstance where you come to work. I remember the first time it ever happened. I came to work. Everybody was real quiet. It was like I was suddenly, at a funeral or something. And one of our victims who we had been talking to was murdered. And it happens all the time. So people oftentimes don't factor that into account. Women tend to, in a domestic violence situation, really face that, risk of fatality if they don't exit that violent circumstance.
You had mentioned that some women, once the police come, say they don't want to have the abuser arrested. And I've also heard that with protective orders, a lot of women come back and change their mind. What do you think is going on in the mind of a victim that causes that?
So many things. And I think there are things that we can all understand. One of them is oftentimes the abuser is her source of, as much as it's a source of risk and danger for her, he's also her source of safety and support. So a lot of times that's financial support. So, she's obtained, let's say she's obtained a restraining order, and she's got children to think about. And it starts to become clear that it's very hard for her to get the financial help that she needs. And the abuser is the source of that. While he's in jail, he can't be working and earning money for things for the kids. Even if they're going to go through a divorce and she's going to leave him, she still needs that income coming in to provide child support payments, other things like that. A lot of times it's emotional. The victim is in a place when the abuser's present, and the victim is in great fear. She wants safety just like we all do. Once he's been removed from the situation and the second guessing starts to set in, I think we've all had that experience. We have a conversation, we go home and we start to doubt ourselves. Hey, maybe I was a little bit dramatic. Maybe I was a little bit mean. Maybe I was part of the situation too. She starts to second guess herself and think, well, I'm safe now. That's what I really want. I don't want to see him lose his job. I don't want to see him anything bad really happen to him. And oftentimes I think as women, there's this sociological pressure to not, we don't want to be seen as vindictive or going out of our way to cause anybody trouble. Men don't seem to struggle as much with this, but women really do. We want to be seen as the good guy, somebody who's being reasonable. So oftentimes a victim will say, okay, I'm safe. That's what I wanted. I don't, maybe his attorney or he himself has said, look, if this restraining order goes through, he's going to lose his job. Or if this charge sticks, he's not going to be able to volunteer at the church anymore, things like that. And a victim puts that blame on herself. Well, I'm causing him this difficulty. And she doesn't want to be seen as doing that.
Yes. Hi, everyone. As parents, we often have gut feelings when something just isn't right. And this can be especially true in co-parenting arrangements where one parent is struggling with addiction. If you're co-parenting with an ex who abuses alcohol, SoberLink can help. SoberLink's alcohol monitoring system is the most convenient, reliable, and reasonable way for a parent to provide evidence that they are not drinking during parenting time. The system's real-time alerts, facial recognition, and tamper detection ensure the integrity of each test, so you can be confident your kids are with a sober parent. With SoberLink, judges rest assured that your child is safe. Attorneys get court-admissible evidence of sobriety, and your kids are able to maintain healthy relationships with both parents. To sign up, SoberLink's offering $50 off your device for our listeners. Visit www.soberlink.com/empowered, and that will be in the show notes as well. So she turns his violence into her problem rather than his problem.
And her fault. And part of that is the abuser has been telling her that the entire time. So one of the hallmarks of this abuse is constantly blaming the victim, even though it's the abuser's cycle and they're going to commit that violence because they want that sense of control over their world. He's telling her, it was because you set me off. It was because your drinking, upset me. It was because you didn't have the dinner ready on time, or you made me feel emasculated, or whatever it is. He's telling her she's setting him off. She's causing it. So she's heard that before and she's taken it to heart. And I just think it's true also as women, we do tend to blame ourselves for our circumstances. It's
Absolutely.
not a good thing. But a victim will take that blame on, and oftentimes it's not all her. The abuser's telling her that, and sometimes well-meaning family members or even members of her faith tradition may also be telling her that it's her job as a good wife to maintain the peace in the home. So there's just a lot of forces reinforcing that idea for victims.
Yeah, stick with them for better, for worse. Wow.
Yeah.
And I also think that there's this pattern of isolating the victim so that there's less support around them. Does that play into this at all?
Absolutely. The first thing that will happen in an actual bona fide case of domestic violence, once, a lot of times the batterer is a charmer. He's somebody that everybody else sees as a great guy, a great person, and he will start to isolate his victim from family and friends who would otherwise be telling her, hey, I don't like the way he talks to you. I don't like the way he treats you. And that isolation serves two purposes. It makes the victim much easier to control, and it also makes it much harder for the victim to get out of the situation because she doesn't have those support levers to pull on to remove herself from the situation. So,
wow.
and oftentimes the violence itself is isolating, because as much as we have progressed as a society, there's still a huge stigma attached to it. Everybody hears a case of a woman who's being subject to violence, and they say, well, why would she stay with him, or why would she let that happen, and how come she didn't do this, and how come she didn't do that? And so she doesn't want anyone to know about the violence because it's embarrassing. People whisper, people talk. So that in and of itself starts to isolate her. So that isolation does make a victim feel, when it is time to go, like helpless and like it's really hard to leave. And that's why a lot of times as a prosecutor, it's our job to start making the victim aware of that you're not alone. There are all kinds of organizations. There are support programs. There are every domestic violence shelter has an outreach program with a support group. And I would always tell victims, you need to go to these support groups, because you will see that you're not alone, that women who are strong, leaders in their community, educated, wonderful people, who are also the subject of violence, they escape the violence. They know they can tell you how, and they can give you that support, and you need it. I mean, none of us can do things on our own. We rely on the support of others, and victims of violence are no different.
What is the importance of a safety plan?
Oh, I love that question. It's a good one. So, let's suppose we have a victim of domestic violence. She knows she's in the cycle of violence. So she recognizes, hey, we're going to have violence. Then there'll be this period of calm. There'll be kind of a honeymoon phase where he says he's sorry, this isn't going to happen again. But then the tension's going to rise, and that violence will be coming again. And she knows, okay, I have to get out of this situation. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to just run out the door screaming, it makes sense to be strategic and smart. It may be the case that he has control of all the finances, that he has, made it harder in many ways for her to go by taking the credit cards and things. So a safety plan is all of your documents in a place where they're easy to grab, people that you can confide in and say, hey, if I give you a call, please come pick me up. Maybe you've reached out to the local domestic violence organization, and every county in the country, there's one that has a secret location for a shelter. So you've spoken to them. They won't tell you where the shelter is, but they'll tell you where to call when you're ready to go, and they'll take you there, something like that. And all of those things are in place. So and victims often know when the violence is coming, because they can feel that tension rise. They can see, okay, he's drinking again, or whatever the triggers are. If that starts to happen and you fear that violence is about to occur, you grab that bag, you put that plan into action, and you go, so that you don't feel like you have to suffer this violence because you don't have a plan. A lot of times I would talk to a victim about a safety plan if she was thinking about leaving, but she's not ready yet. Whether that be because the children have to be secured or whatever it is, then, because oftentimes I'm saying to her, let's go right now. Let's call the shelter right now. And if she says, well, not right now, then I say, well, then let's talk about safety planning.
Yes, absolutely. So let's say this progresses to court. What are the differences in the court system about handling the criminal case that comes from this particular incident?
Sure. So the court system can seem kind of crazy if you're not used to it. And one of the biggest distinctions in court is we have civil court, which is when two parties have a disagreement and they sue each other. And all divorces are in civil court. It's husband versus wife, wife versus wife, whatever it is. Those are two parties against each other. And the rules in that court are different than criminal court. Criminal court is the state of Florida, that's where I live, Florida, state of Florida versus an individual. So in the case of a crime against one of us is a crime against us all. It's a breach of the peace. It's, if I go into Walmart and I steal their merchandise and walk out, it's not Walmart versus Angela Sarabia. It's the state of Florida versus Angela Sarabia to prosecute me for the crime against Walmart. So same thing with that domestic violence. It's not batterer versus victim. It's the state or maybe the federal government versus the batterer. And the victim is simply a witness in the case. So oftentimes a victim may come in, the batterer is probably saying to her, you need to take care of this. You need to drop this. You need to make this go away. So a victim comes in to talk to me as a prosecutor, and I tell her, ma'am, you're not in control of my case. I represent the government. I'm in control of this case. I want to hear what you have to say, but ultimately I will determine whether this goes forward or not. And you're simply a witness. And it can get a little bit ugly in some jurisdictions if a victim doesn't want to testify or isn't willing to participate. Sometimes the government will come after her and say, look, we're going to have you held in contempt if you refuse to come in and talk about the crime that occurred, because we need to keep the public safe from this individual. And it's not simply about you anymore. So in that criminal system, it'll be very different. And for victims who are going through a divorce and a criminal case, they're constantly toggling between these two different systems that have different rules. And that's where oftentimes speaking to a victim's advocate with the sheriff's office or having the services of a good attorney can help you not feel so out of place in both systems.
Absolutely. What do you say to the people that say, well, the bigger issue is women false reporting domestic violence, that they focus on that rather than the problem?
Absolutely. So I get that question sometimes when I speak. And I will say the issue of false reporting, it is so unlikely to be the case that a report of domestic violence is false. And there's several reasons for that. The first of which is most victims of violence will tell you it's embarrassing. It's not anything anybody wants to claim. There's nothing about it that's glorifying or makes you look good at all. So oftentimes a victim is overcoming that embarrassment, overcoming that sense of shame to make a report. Secondly is when a victim makes a report about domestic violence and calls the sheriff's office, there's oftentimes not a lot in it for her. The criminal justice system will come, they'll arrest an offender, they'll prosecute an offender, but there's no pot of gold on the other side. The victim walks away from court and the batterer gets a criminal justice sentence, some time in jail, and that's all she really gets. So oftentimes this talk about a false report is this idea that a woman would be so vindictive that she would really want to see this terrible thing happen to a man. And I really find that that's not the case for most women. Finally, the odds of the scales are stacked on behalf of a defendant in a criminal case, because in America we hold all arrested people innocent until proven guilty. So we presume everybody's innocent, and that presumption must be overcome by evidence. And the standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. So in order to actually convict someone of domestic violence, you have to prove they committed the violence beyond a reasonable doubt. And I've lost cases before where I've had no injuries and no independent witnesses. And so if a victim tries to just make it up and there's no photos of injuries and there's no other corroborating things, oftentimes she doesn't prevail. And so the point to that just is there's just not a lot to be gained to make up something. And I think everybody sort of knows that. So I've never seen false reports of violence to be a huge issue. Every now and then you might have a case where a victim's trying to make an injury seem a little worse than it is for whatever reason. But oftentimes police officers take photographs, they gather other evidence, and those issues are sorted out prior to trial.
Gotcha. So what should a victim do who's going through a divorce against the abuser to keep herself safe, to keep her family safe, to keep her loved ones safe?
I love that question. There's so many things, but this is something that she may not think about at the outset. But number one is cease any and all communications with the batterer. There's almost nothing to be gained. And it's important to start with that at the outset, because oftentimes the victim has kind of calmed him down, talked him down. He's told her, he's kind of led her to believe she is responsible for his emotional state.
Right.
So she's like, well, gee, if I stop talking to him, then, he's going to go crazy. But oftentimes that communication, he's getting back inside her head. He's getting her to feel that fear.
Right.
Once you're into a divorce process, your attorney can communicate with the other side just fine. So number one, follow the advice of an attorney. stop any and all communications with the batterer. They don't help. It's probably true that in the case of actual bona fide domestic violence, the threats and the danger does go up a little bit when a victim does leave. But if she gets to a secure location, if she ceases all communication, if he recognizes that the threats and the temper tantrums aren't going to change the game, those will tend to go down over time. She still needs to take her safety very seriously, but stop all communications. The next step is to obtain an injunction for protection, also called a restraining order. What that does is it puts everybody on notice that there's this batterer is not to be at certain locations that the victim frequents. For example, I go to a Christian church here in town. I give a little bit of advice to our church safety team. If someone comes in and they've obtained that restraining order, the safety team takes it and is aware, okay, if we see this batterer come by and wants to come worship, at our gathering, we say, hey, you're not to come here because this court paper says you're not to be here. And that protects the victim. The schools where the kids go to school, other places, that way she feels like, okay, if I see him here, I can call law enforcement right now and I don't have to wait till he does something criminal. So a lot of people will say, oh, a restraining order is just a piece of paper. If he's going to come do harm, he's going to come do harm. And that may be, but oftentimes a batterer is trying to intimidate the victim, make the victim feel afraid just by driving by and doing other things that would not otherwise be criminal. But this restraining order makes it criminal. It says you shouldn't even be here and allows law enforcement to remove him. Because just imagine a circumstance where you're sitting in church and your batterer walks in. If there's not a restraining order, he's allowed to come to church. He's just there to worship. So it kind of provides that layer of protection. It also lets the batterer know that the victim is very serious about this and he can stop trying to goad her into anything, that she's really serious and ready to get herself and her children safe. Other than that, I would also say, tell people, family and friends, the situation. Don't be afraid of the stigma. Let people help you. Keep an eye out for you. A lot of times people want to help. So I can think of a victim that I've been advising, and she let people know. People came over. They helped her install a Ring camera in her home. They offered to watch the kids so she could get some things that she needed. People are upset by domestic violence and they want to help. So those are just some of the things I can think of off the top of my head to victim to keep safe.
Many people feel divorce is a death sentence, but with the right support and guidance, you can move through the process with knowledge, skills, and confidence. It can also be a time of growth and progress. As a divorce and empowerment coach, I'm an invaluable member of your divorce team. I help you understand and navigate the process, come to terms with your emotions, avoid costly mistakes, learn skills to help you communicate and negotiate, find your true voice, and create an empowered life post-divorce. If you're interested in learning more, schedule a free consultation at herempowereddivorce.com. So let's say...
Oh, I'm sorry, Beverly, I just thought of one more thing. Sorry about that. Sure. So when there's a criminal case, so let's say we have a divorce going on, the victim's got her injunction, she's doing her safety planning, she's following the advice of her people in her local domestic violence organization. If there's a criminal case going on and the defendant has been arrested, then oftentimes he's going to pay his bond money and get out of jail. When he does that the bond or the bail, there's certain conditions he must abide by. In every domestic case, unless otherwise told not to, a judge will order no contact with the victim as a condition of release. So let's say he goes into jail, he comes out, and he texts her, "You bitch, I hate you." That text is a violation of his bond. Call law enforcement, they take a look at the phone, they go put him back in jail where he can sit until the case is concluded. So that's another layer of protection for victims, that any contact, if he hires a skywriter, if he posts on her Facebook page, any contact with a victim is going to be a violation of his pretrial release, and he can be taken back to jail for that.
Gotcha. You bring up an interesting point, social media. In this dynamic, does social media aggravate the situation?
Oh, that's a good question. It's one of those things that's out there that cuts both ways. On the one hand, it just provides more ways that a batterer can keep tabs on a victim, can see where she's at, what she's doing, because we voluntarily post so much. I would say if a victim is truly concerned about, say, we have a stalking situation or something like that, it would be great advice to tell friends, hey, if we're out, let's not post pictures today, guys. I'm trying to keep my location secret. Let's not tag me in photos. So that can be, it cuts that way, but it cuts the other way where it creates a record. So if the batterer is in there bad mouthing her on Facebook, what I would say as a prosecutor is screenshot those things and let's print them out, because they are admissible in court under certain circumstances. I can at least confront a batterer with it. Hey, you said this and that, and get here to say what he has to say about it. So they're all things that paint that picture. So it can be a tool for both in divorce proceedings and in criminal cases to show the pattern of intimidation, to corroborate what the victim's saying, especially if there are threats. I'm thinking of Instagram messages, Facebook messages where he says, I'll find you. You can't hide from me. Print those out. Don't respond. There's no need for response, but print them, save them, present them to your attorney or the prosecutor in the case, and just use that as a tool to keep yourself safe.
I would think another thing that's important is with telephones, with cell phones, you can have like joint accounts. So she may be on his plan. She also may have the apps where they track your location.
Mm-hmm.
I would think it's important to turn all that off. Maybe
Absolutely.
even get a burner phone or something.
Yeah, there's so much technology out there for surveillance. Some of it's very sophisticated, but our own phones can be used as tools of surveillance against us. So it would depend a lot on exactly what the situation was. A lot of times phones are expensive and a victim doesn't want to just get a whole new phone. But I would say it may be worth its weight in gold to get a new phone. You don't know, maybe he's installed software on the phone that even if you think you've turned off some of those Google Maps or whatever, it may be that there's technology you're not aware of and he's monitoring your communications. I can think of a woman I was advising where a husband did just that. And unbeknownst to her, all of her text messages and all the other communications, he was seeing that. So first and foremost, I would say, talk to your attorney about it. If you're lucky enough to have a good attorney, they may advise you to get a new phone. It may be in a divorce proceeding. He may have to pay for that. It doesn't have to be the best phone on the market, but it's new number, because you may need to block him from any and all communications. That may be harder to do. I also think if they're on the same plan, he may be able to print out maybe not the conversations, but who she's called in the past 2 months. He can see those phone numbers, and maybe he starts calling everybody she's called and says, what are you doing talking to my so-and-so? So my thought is, get a new line, get a new plan, get a new start, get a new phone, but also be aware of other forms of monitoring technology. One woman I was speaking with, the husband had slipped a recording device into her purse. So she's talking about the violence, talking about things in the car, and he's hearing all of it. So maybe friends who are tech savvy coming, hey, take a look at my car, take a look at my things. What do you think? And just being aware of all those different ways that you need to just be thinking about in a digital world, a connected world, to keep yourself safe.
What would you say to the community at large? I think there's a huge issue with us condoning domestic violence through our silence and through our inaction. What would you say to people at large about that?
That's a really good question. What I would say oftentimes is there needs to be a lot of understanding for victims out there. So oftentimes we mean well, but when we are judging other people, sometimes it comes out of fear. We don't want to believe that we could ever be a victim of violence. We don't want to believe our daughter, a friend, a family member could ever be a victim of violence. So to tell ourselves it could never happen, we say to ourselves and to anyone who would listen, if this happened to me, I tell you what I'd do. I'd leave them, or worse. I've heard women, they're being flippant, but they'll be like, oh, I'd put him, he'd never see the light of day or whatever. What I would say is, we don't want to judge a person until we've walked a mile in their shoes. And the first thing you can say to anyone who reveals to you that they are a victim of any kind of violence is, I am so sorry that that happened to you. And you should not have had to go through that. Try to keep questions that mean well. We all mean well, but are questions like, well, why were you together for so long? Or why didn't you call me? Things like that. You mean well, but it can come across as judgment. And then if you feel passionate about this, talk about it. Because I've talked to people, I knew someone in college, and they got violent with me on a couple of occasions, and I didn't want to talk about it because I didn't want anyone to see me as somebody who would let something like that slide. I didn't speak up. But when I've told other people about that experience, they've gone, oh my gosh, something like that happened to me. Maybe it happened once when I was young, maybe it's happening right now. But when we share that vulnerability and we talk about those unspoken things, people can reciprocate and they can talk about it too. And so just raising our voices is huge. And then, of course, giving to our local domestic violence organization. Every county, every locality has one. So look it up. Hey, go to a fundraiser, give them a little money, do something of that nature, because they're out there on the front lines providing ways to keep victims safe. And that giving can be voting with your feet and letting the organizations know, hey, there's support for the community for you.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh, and one more thought I had about that. Sorry, I interrupt you. Was just that this is something that I saw in my work, is that we sometimes think of domestic violence as being something that, well, it occurs in uneducated communities. We have this vision in our head of there are a couple of people in a trailer, nobody's got a college education and everybody they're ignorant of. But that's not the case. I saw victims come in, wealthy victims, educated victims, smart victims, church-going victims, church-going batterers. It cuts across every socioeconomic status, every education level. We even talked a lot about sexual violence, but same thing. It's out there. I think we think of domestic violence sometimes as a problem more of the past, more of the early 1900s. We've progressed so far as a society, but it is happening in, at least, I would say, the 1/3 of every woman I met has had an experience that I've heard about. So who knows if it's more like 1/2. So my thought is, let's just stop seeing it as isolated to one type of community or education level, and just see it as, hey, this is a social problem that is out there and that we all struggle with, and remove the stigma.
Well, I'm proof of that. MBA, senior corporate executive, and a victim. But now I'm a survivor. So I love that.
I love it.
When we talked about at the beginning that you had created this play that highlights issues with domestic violence, how have you used theater in that way?
Oh, I love that question. So theater is just my release. It's my escape. It's my hobby. I really, during the pandemic especially, turned a lot of that, because you couldn't perform, you couldn't go anywhere. So I channeled that into writing. And my play is about strangers. So I wanted to write about domestic violence and relationship violence, but I didn't want to put it into a relationship setting just because it can be so bleak and so complex. So I made it between strangers. But I wrote a play about a woman who comes into work on a Saturday and encounters 2 criminals breaking in. And they're trying to keep her there, and they're trying to get her to stop interfering. So they're trying to control her. She's trying to figure out how to turn them against each other so that she can get away. And so that I could explore all the subtle ways that violence can be a tool of manipulation. So I sort of took a lot of what I learned and baked it into the dialogue and into the experiences. So every time one of the criminals who was really bad would use violence in either a subtle or non-subtle way, the other criminal is like, well, you just made him upset. You've just aggravated him. And she, my main character is saying, he's doing it all on purpose. All this getting upset, throwing things around, that is just, it's all purposeful. It's all calculated. And that was sort of my way to raise the audience to think about violence differently. it's not an outburst of somebody who's lost control of themselves. Oftentimes it's an outburst by somebody who's trying to gain control of the situation. So just a way to, because I find that when we come into a theater and we sit down and the lights go down, we watch the stage, we tend to have an open mind. We're ready to see and hear things that we don't normally allow ourselves to. And we're willing to consider another person's perspective, because that's what theater and movies and entertainment does, is it gives us an opportunity to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. And there's an empathy that arises and an understanding that arises in a way that doesn't necessarily occur at in a class or at a talk. So just using theater as a way to open some minds. Hey, think about violence differently.
Absolutely. Well, I like to ask all my guests to come up with 3 actionable tips that women can use. And in this case, it would be women experiencing some form of abuse. What tips would you give to them?
Okay, so this is something we didn't talk as much about when we talked about the cycle of violence, but that word abuse kind of encapsulates not just violence, but also some emotional abuse. So a lot of times victims would, almost every time, a victim would say, hey, bruises heal. The physical violence isn't the worst part of the relationship. The worst part is the emotional abuse, the things he says to me, the ways he makes me feel. So number one, I would say, if you're a victim who's isolated, first action step is regain your support structure. So maybe that parent or friend or sister or brother that you haven't spoken to in a long time, let's reach back out. So number one, find your sources of support. Number two, I would say is if there's a crime going on, don't be afraid to call law enforcement. Things have changed. Law enforcement officials now are very well versed in domestic violence. They have specialized training to understand some of the dynamics involved. And there are jerks everywhere, but generally speaking, they're going to be very kind about it in ways that you may not expect. So number two, don't be afraid to call law enforcement. And then number three is because feelings aren't facts, and a lot of times we can feel very unempowered. And our feelings have led us into the situation that we're trying to get out of now. Find your trusted people and start to follow their advice. So that may be that friend who's always been telling you, hey, you deserve better. That may be your attorney who's saying, look, I know you feel like you need to call him and smooth things over, but I'm telling you not to. Or it may be the domestic violence professional who's saying, I think it's time for you to come into the shelter. But you're following the advice of people and putting your feelings to the side for now. Because they've led you here. These people care about you. Let's follow your advice. And there's going to be overwhelming support for you out there. I think a lot of times we can all get into our negative self-talk. Nobody cares. No, everybody's going to blame me. Things like that. And I think you're going to find in most cases, your fears about that are probably untrue. Most people are going to surround you. They're going to embrace you. They're going to care about you. And so let's make sure to have that positive self-talk that you will have more support than you think you will when you start to exit the situation.
Yeah. One of the things, just another question I thought of, is the situation where people on the outside are very vocal against domestic violence. But then when an abuser is in their family, it's a very different story. Have you seen that?
Absolutely. I've seen that a lot because I think in our family, we want peace in the family. We want everybody to get along. So oftentimes the family, everybody in the family is going to say, well, I see both sides of this. They don't want to believe their family member could be capable of violence. So, he's saying, I wasn't that bad. She's saying I hit her. I didn't really hit her. I pushed her. It wasn't, and we want to believe that, we don't want to believe that our family members are capable of violence, and people in the family want to be seen as neutral. They see what they consider to be, a bitter situation, and they want to see both sides of it. So I do see that a lot. It may be, as much as I was just counseling people to get a hold of those support people, it may be that your family is not a good source of support right now. If you're saying that there's violence or emotional abuse, and they're not hearing you on that, it may be time to step away from our extended family and get around some professionals, get around some, that's why being in a support group for survivors of violence can be so important, because I guarantee you there'll be someone in that group who went through this, who can say, yeah, my mother took his side, or my sister didn't believe me. Sometimes that can really crush us when the people who are supposed to keep us safe don't believe us about how bad it is. I mean, people just don't want to believe this is so common, and they don't want to believe it happens. So it may be that even though your family has always been your source of support, it may be that right now they're not hearing you and you do have to step away. And once you are able to get yourself into a safe place and move on from the relationship, then can be the time for mending. But for now, it could be, hey, we got to stop listening to them. They're not helping you here. Sometimes our faith traditions, which are very like family to us, can be unhelpful. Maybe you've got a pastor who's saying, hey, we just need to counsel you too. We just need to work it out. So all those things, I would say, if violence is going on, talk to the professionals that handle violence all the time, because they may be more helpful in their guiding of you than family can be sometimes.
This has just been such an incredible time together. How can our listeners find you if they want more information?
Okay. So I'm on Facebook. My name is Angela, and then my last name is S as in Sam, A-R-A, B as in boy, I-A, Sarabia. You can find me there. I don't have a website or anything. A lot of times I'm just getting, because I've just become a voice in the community against domestic violence, I'll get messages in my Facebook inbox all the time from people I don't even know saying, hey, here's my situation. So send me a message, reach out to me. If I don't know the answer, I'll know somebody who does, especially in law world. And that's a great place to find me. My play that I've written, Duress, I got a theater to put it up, which was wonderful. I want to do that more. But for right now, it's just a script that I've got. So if you'd like to bring Duress to a theater near you, Facebook would be a great way to reach out. You also have my email address. Maybe you could put on the website for the podcast. Email me. I give out my email address to anybody and everybody. I figure, hey, if it ever becomes a problem, I'll just change my email address. So I get emails all the time looking for advice, having questions, anything. So email me. I love it. It's my passion. So you're never bothering me. Even if it's like, hey, I have a friend, she's got this personal situation, I'm here to help. I love it. So contact me in those ways. And I look forward to helping in any way I can.
And what's your email address, Angela?
It's Angela Sarabia, Angela Sarabia 103 at gmail.com. So my full name, 103.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being my guest today. This has been so informative, and I think it will be so helpful when you think about 1 out of 3 women are the victims of domestic violence. This information is absolutely critical.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Beverly. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. And to the audience, thank you for being with Angela and myself on this episode of Her Empowered Divorce. All of Angela's information will be available in the show notes. This and all our episodes can be found at herempowereddivorce.com on the podcast page, or on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also watch the video version on our YouTube channel, Her Empowered Divorce. Please like and subscribe. Please share our story with your friends so we can help and reach out as many women as possible. Join me for our next episode, where I'll be diving deeper into what other expert professionals can share to help you. Remember, you can find more information, again, to eliminate the pain, overwhelm, and create more knowledge and happiness at herempowereddivorce.com. Until next time, stay empowered.
Hello, empowered women. I'm Susan Guthrie, and with over 30 years as a leading family law attorney and mediator, I've stood by many as they navigated the intricate paths of divorce. That's why I created the Divorce and Beyond podcast. Drawing from my own expert insights and bringing in some of the country's top voices on divorce and its many facets, we aim not just to help you endure the storm, but to rise and shine brighter than ever in your beautiful beyond. If you are a regular on Her Empowered Divorce with Beverly Price, you already value empowerment during these challenging transitions. Together, our podcasts form a safety net, ensuring you don't just survive, but you thrive. So take my hand and let's journey together. Listen to Divorce and Beyond wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Remember, the best is yet to come in your beautiful beyond. You can find the podcast on all major podcast outlets or on the website divorceandbeyond.com.
Thank you for listening to the Her Empowered Divorce podcast. Remember, divorce doesn't have to be a death sentence. With the right support and guidance, you can move through the process with knowledge, skills, and confidence. It can also be a time of growth and empowerment. As a divorce coach, I'm the first call you should make when you are contemplating divorce, as the next steps will take and set the stage for your entire divorce and life after. I help you understand and navigate the process, come to terms with your emotions, and avoid costly mistakes. Find your true voice and create an empowered life post-divorce. If you're interested in learning more, schedule a free consultation at herempowereddivorce.com. Take care.